Hey, how you doing, all of you Skelton people out there? This is my third video on Skelton history. Coming to you, I'm recording this on January 12th of 2023, so Happy New Year to everybody. Coming to you from Las Cruces, New Mexico. I want to talk about James Skelton. Now, there's a James Skelton that was contracted to rebuild the capital of Williamsburg, and also James Skelton that owned Elk Island, which is an island in the middle of the James River. And if you stick around to the end of this video, I'll have a little bit of a surprise, at least what I think is a surprise for you. So let's talk about James Skelton that rebuilt the capital of Williamsburg. But before I get into that, let me give you a little bit of a history of the various capitals that were in, or that have been, or the various places that have been capitals of Virginia. And of course, to start off with Jamestown, which was the first permanent English settlement, and it was there, the capital was there until about 1699 when it was burned by an arsonist. Now, it had a lot of different places on Jamestown Island where the legislature met. They had a couple Capitol buildings get burned down. And if you've never been to Jamestown Island, you really should do yourself a favor and go. If you're into colonial American history, I mean, there's no better place to go than Jamestown and Williamsburg, and I'll talk about that later too. But I've been to both places, 3 or 4 times now, and I'll tell you, the last time I went to Jamestown Island, probably experienced one of the most American things you can experience. Here I am at the first permanent English settlement. I'm walking around where essentially the United States was founded by Europeans. And I look up into a tree, and what do I see but a bald eagle up there looking down on us. So I took a picture of it real quick, and if I remember when I edit this video, I'll put that picture down here so you can see what I saw too. But it raised the hair on the back of my neck, so I just thought it was an unbelievable thing. But so Jamestown Island was the first capital, was the capital for almost 100 years. But Jamestown Island, as the name would imply, is an island. So as Virginia grew, expanded westward, got more and more populated, Jamestown Island became a little bit harder to get to because you can't, there's only one point of entry, and it was also not a very big place again. So as the colony grew, it was kind of landlocked, and it wasn't a great place to expand, and it was all swampy and buggy and insects and mosquitoes. It just wasn't a great place. So when it burned down, they used that as an excuse to move it to Williamsburg, move the capital to Williamsburg. And so they moved the capital there before they even had a Capitol building to meet in. So they met in various places. But let me have to check my notes here. 1704, the first Capitol building at Williamsburg was open for business, and that's where they met. And they met there every year through 1747, and guess what? It burned down. At that point, they were real close to moving the Capitol again, moving it from Williamsburg to Richmond. But through a lot of wrangling and negotiations, it was a close vote, but they decided to go ahead and rebuild there in Williamsburg. And so they had to contract somebody to do that. And that's where James Skelton comes in. However, I don't think he was their first choice, because there's an article, I'll read it to you, from May 28, 1750, in a letter book by Francis Jerdone. I don't know who Francis Jerdone is. I'm also going to talk about a diary of John Blair. I don't know who John Blair is either. But Francis Jerdone and John Blair were copious note takers. They took a lot of notes, sent a lot of letters, and so we've used them for a lot of this stuff. But in 1750, Francis Jerdone wrote to Hugh Crawford. Hugh Crawford will be important later. that Mr. Walker, the builder, died soon after he left the country. Since his death, Mr. Skelton has undertaken the rebuilding of the Capitol. So whoever Mr. Walker was their first choice. He stroked out or died and wasn't able to finish the job, so Mr. Skelton, no first name given, stepped in. And that was from Francis Giordone. Now, John Blair, in his diary, in January 1751, also referenced Mr. Skelton's work. Again, no first name. That was in January. That was January 25th. January 31st of 1751, John Blair wrote, "Skelton set off to go up to bury his wife, having got a black coat for it." So again, no first names, just say Skelton. That was in January. In April, again in John Blair, he writes, "Skelton wants a meeting of the committee." That was in April. In October, John Blair is talking about getting the bond transferred, essentially getting it transferred from Walker to Skelton. He makes another note of that in November. And then, let's see, November 15th, 1751, John Blair wrote, "Skelton fired the last kiln for the Capitol." And then 12th of September 1754, Francis Giordone, again writing to Hugh Crawford, says, "Your old acquaintance James Skelton is dead." And so when I edit this, I'll put the citations there at the bottom. So it's pretty obvious that James Skelton did that. But let's back up. So that started in 1750. But let's back up because there are a couple other things that tell us a little bit about James Skelton. The St. Peter's Parish Church in New Kent County, in November of 1719, so 30 years before the rebuilding of the Capitol, they agreed to pay James Skelton to build a wall around St. Peter's Church and pay him 26,000 pounds of tobacco for that. The 26,000 pounds of tobacco was a lot, so he got paid a pretty penny for that. And that was in November of 1719. And then, I don't have it here, I think it was in October. I've lost my notes. So then in October of 1720, I know it was in 1720, I guess I don't know exactly what the date was, he actually was paid 26,580 pounds. And by the way, that church is still there. I don't know if that wall is still there, but that church is still there. So there's a good chance that wall may still be there that James Skelton helped build. So in 1719, James Skelton built a wall, St. Peter's Church. 1750 is when he did the rebuilding of the Capitol. But between that and 1733, a James Skelton was appointed to inspect 2 bridges over a creek in Goochland County. So was that James Skelton appointed that because he was a carpenter, or just because he was somebody else? I don't know, but it fits. So there's no question that James Skelton was the guy that rebuilt the Capitol. Now, if you go to Colonial Williamsburg, and you, again, just like I said about Jamestown Island, you should go to Colonial Williamsburg too. It's just a phenomenal place. Some of the buildings there are the actual buildings that were around before the Revolutionary War started. Other buildings that are there are rebuilt according to the plans and sketches and notes and diaries of people. They do a lot of excavation and archaeology work there that tells us a lot about what went on, where, and how. And they have, what I think is the coolest thing, is you can go into these various buildings, like you can go into the blacksmith shop, the gunsmith shop, the silversmith, the dressmaker, the hat maker, the cobbler. You can go into all these trades, and you can actually watch them do it, build whatever it is they're building, doing it with the materials and the methods and tools that they used back in the 1760s, 1770s. It's absolutely phenomenal. I've been there 2 or 3 times, maybe even 4. It's awesome. But if you go there, you'll see there's a reconstructed Capitol building. That is actually the first that is a reconstruction of the first Capitol building. That is not a reconstruction of the one James Skelton was contracted to build. But it's very cool. And I should point out too that if you think about it, that building that James Skelton, that Capitol that James Skelton built, I mean, I'm looking at my notes here again. I mean, that was the building that Virginia, the state, declared their independence from Britain in. That was the building, the one that James Skelton built, that is the building where Virginia wrote its state constitution. Patrick Henry and George Washington both roamed the halls there and made important, famous speeches there. That is the building that inspired Thomas Jefferson's building, his home in Monticello. By the way, there's a Skelton-Jefferson connection. I don't think that's a coincidence. But that building that James Skelton built, it actually, wait for it, you guessed it, burned to the ground. And that was in 1812. And then at that point, they finally did move the capital to Richmond. So a lot of history there in colonial Williamsburg. James Skelton's footprint is there as well. So now let's talk about the Elk Island James Skelton. And again, I'm going to read from my notes. First off, let's get out there and say that the James Skelton that owned Elk Island was not a doctor. I've seen a lot of information out there that says Dr. James Skelton. He was not a doctor. I don't know where that came from, where the doctor part came from. I don't want to sound like a know-it-all jerk, but I literally don't know where that came from. He was definitely not a doctor, and like I said at the end, I can prove it at the end that he was not a doctor. This is the James Skelton that married Jane Merriweather, the daughter of Francis Merriweather, and the granddaughter of the Bathurst family. So the Merriweathers and the Bathursts, they were pretty prominent, extremely rich people. So here are some of the transactions, just some of them. This isn't an exhaustive list, but here's some of the transactions. Excuse me. In 1723, James Skelton purchased 1,200 acres in Henrico County. 3 years later, in 1726, he bought 750 acres, also in Henrico County, next to Major Harrison. That's an important thing that I'll talk about later. I don't know if in this video or another video. Also in 1726, he purchased an additional 1,600 acres, also in Henrico County. So between 1723 and 1726, I mean, what's that add up to? Just between those, that's 1,900. That's 3,000. Yeah, that's 28. That's like over 3,000 acres of land. And like I said, I'm not giving you all of them. 8 years later, 1734, in Essex County, James Skelton witnessed a land transaction between Thomas Wright Belfield and Mary. That Mary Belfield is the daughter of Francis Merriweather. So there's another Merriweather connection. In 1735, so 1 year later, a transaction between James Skelton, gentleman. Now that's an important note, because if you were listed as a gentleman, you'd made it to the upper class. I mean, you were definitely the upper class. If legal transactions, legal documents listed your name and then gentleman, you were upper class. They sold 701 acres. At that point, in 1735, they sold 701 acres. In 1742, they sold 600 acres to Ben Jonson. However, Ben Jonson wasn't able to pay him, so essentially they foreclosed on Ben Jonson, got that land back. But then 4 years later, Ben Jonson was actually able to pay him. So, and there were more transactions there. The James Skelton was appointed to oversee a special case. There are some other land transactions I didn't even get to. James Skelton's and Jane Merriweather's son, Bathurst Skelton, is the one that married Martha Wales, a very prominent family. And then when Bathurst died young, Martha Wales went on to marry Thomas Jefferson. So I told you there was a Jefferson connection there. But here's the end. Here's a surprise at the end, or what I think is a surprise at the end. On my last visit to colonial Williamsburg, there's a library there, the John D. Rockefeller Library. It's called that because John D. Rockefeller essentially funded that colonial Williamsburg revitalization. You know, he was obviously tons wealthy. And there's a library there. And so my last visit there was in December of 2021. That noise you hear, by the way, is our dog walking on the floor. Now he's laying down. And so I go in there, this is December of 2021, it's a little over a year ago, and I just ask him, I say, hey, I think you have a document in here that references a skeleton. And so Marianne, I don't remember Marianne's last name, but Marianne dug it up, said, yep, here it is. And it was an original deed from 1723, and I mean the original. It wasn't a photocopy, it wasn't transcription. I mean, it was the actual deed that was executed in 1723. It had the little wax seal on it and everything. And this was a game changer because this deed, it says, and again, when I edit this film, or when I edit this video, I'll put it in there, but this deed very clearly says that James Skelton, and it couldn't be more clear that it's a K, James Skelton, carpenter, city of Williamsburg, is buying Elk Island. That makes it, there's no other conclusion that can reasonably be drawn then that the James Skelton that rebuilt the Capitol and the James Skelton that owned Oak Island and was the father-in-law of, well, I guess it wasn't really father-in-law of Martha Jefferson because by that time Bathurst had died, but those are one and the same. And there are a lot of people that have gone for years and years and years, decades, saying, no, those are two different people, those are two different people. And I'm telling you, as of December of 2021, I think it's indisputable that they're the same. So that's it. That's your Skelton family history video for this time. I'm not sure what I'll do. I have some other ideas for some Skelton videos that involve this James Skelton right here. But you know, there's also, I could do a video on Red Skelton right here. I could do a video on the Skelton vehicle, the Skelton car. There are tons of videos that I could do, but I will probably continue to build out the Skelton family from colonial Virginia. You know, the one I did on John Skelton, the immigrant, and his children and wife. And so I'll probably continue to build that out. So let me know in the comments if this was helpful, or if there are any corrections. Maybe I missed something, maybe I don't have something right, or if you have other ideas for things you'd like to see. So if you watched this to the end, thank you. If you watched it at all, thank you.